Finally, we are at the NBA playoffs, and I am here to give my first round predictions. And let's start with the matchup that everyone's probably looking to out east. Celtics against the Heat. They meet again, this time in the first round, which is a bit earlier than they normally meet. This is usually when the Heat like to play spoiler against the Bucks. They're going to try and do it against Boston this year. Obviously, they've been an issue for them in the postseason on multiple occasions now since the bubble. Boston need to try and fight their demons this time, especially with Jimmy likely out for Miami for what is likely going to be the entirety of the series. Now, this is still a feisty Miami team. They still have Tyler Hero. They still have Bam Adebayo. They still have, hopefully, at some point, Terry Rozier, but his health remains in question as well. They're going to rely on the likes of Vet and Kevin Love to step up. They're going to rely on the likes of Caleb Martin to hopefully shoot the ball really well again. Maybe Duncan Robinson, now that he's back in the lineup, can really catch his fire. But this is the Celtics team that is much different than what we have seen in the past. Drew Holiday is in. Kristaps Porzingis is in. Defense is elite. The spacing is even better than it was before. The depth is still good. Boston should win this, honestly, quite comfortably. Even with the stinginess of Miami, the great head coaching of Eric Spoelstra, Boston have home court. Boston have the better talent. Boston have been the better team throughout the entirety of the season. Give me Boston in 5 over the Miami Heat. Moving on to the 2-7 matchup. An interesting matchup. A 2-7 being this close is crazy between the Knicks and the 76ers. Now, obviously, the 76ers are not your typical 7 seed. They have what would have been a leading MVP candidate if he did not get injured. Obviously, his health is not 100% right now. He clearly did not look 100% like a healthy Joel Embiid in the play-in tournament, and that is something to monitor going into the series. But Philly are still a team that still has some amount of Joel Embiid, Tyrese Maxey, Tobias Harris for whatever that's worth, Kelly Oubre, Buddy Hield, who can get hot from 3, and the veteran leadership of Kyle Lowry with the mad scientist that is Nick Nurse. But then you also have that against the defensive guru and defensive mentality of the Knicks. And this is a Knicks team that has Isaiah Hartenstein, who's at a breakout year, who's going to be dealing with Joel plus OG and Precious Achiuwa, who have dealt very well with Embiid in the past, being in the playoffs a couple of years ago with the Raptors, and this over the last couple of years in the regular season with Toronto. That three-headed monster of Hartenstein, OG, and Achiuwa is going to be very difficult for them to deal with, not to mention the fact that you're going to have the likes of Josh Hart or Miles McBride being able to go out on Tyrese Maxey. It's going to be difficult. Hibbs versus Nurse defensively is going to be a very fun matchup. Interesting point to note, the 76ers very much struggled with the defense and the zone defense of Miami at times during the play-in tournament, with Lowry really being their only good perimeter passer and guy who could create anything within that zone defense of the Heat. If anyone else is going to be that much of a disturbance defensively, it's going to be the Knicks. So it's going to be a tight one. I think this is a 7-game series either way. Give me the Knicks. I think Embiid is not quite healthy enough for them to get through, but give me the Knicks in a very tight, competitive 7-game series. Milwaukee, Indiana is another interesting series due to the fact that there's been some beef between the two teams throughout the course of the season, and unfortunately becomes a little bit more interesting because Giannis is out for at least the first 2 games of the series and potential more. The Bucks are sub 500 since they've acquired Doc Rivers, and they're 3-5 in that time with all 3 of their big 3 on the floor. However, the Pacers are 3-21 since the change, 30-21 since the change of the calendar year. Now, of course, the Pacers are young. Halliburton, of course, lacks experience. There's some guys on this team who have some experience. TJ McConnell, of course, being a vet. Miles Turner had some first-round playoff series back in the day when it was him and Brogdon. Sabonis. Pascal Siakam obviously has a ring under his belt. But as a whole, it's a young team. However, no Giannis is going to be a problem, and the lack of perimeter defense for the Bucks is going to be an issue. Halliburton could really get going. TJ McConnell could be a really big impact off the bench. And when you consider the fact that Dame still hasn't really found his shot, Malik Beasley has been moved to the bench as he struggles for the last month or so, and we know what Doc Rivers is like, especially in the postseason. Again, a very competitive series. Give me the Pacers in 7. Now, a matchup that most people probably aren't that intrigued by, but me as a defensive guy is very much looking forward to, is Cavs versus the Magic in the 4-5 matchup out east. This is two young teams with not a ton of experience outside of the likes of Donovan Mitchell for the Cavs, who's had a few runs with the Jazz. Orlando, Joe Ingles with the Jazz. I mean, there's not much experience here, and Joe Ingles obviously isn't going to be a prominent member of this series. Now, it is worth noting, statistically, the Cavs' defense has not been great the last 1 to 2 months once they got all their guys back, once Mobley came back, once Garland came back. The Magic, they haven't dropped off. Now, both of them have been bottom 15 to bottom 10 offenses all year. It's going to play out very defensively, very sloppy. Spacing is going to be questionable at times. It's really going to come down to who can make shots. Can Donovan Mitchell bounce back from a couple of bad postseason appearances? And Paolo Banchero and Franz Wagner in their first playoff appearances, can they show up? And then is it, can Okoro continue his better shooting? Can Dean Wade continue his better shooting? Can Max Strus, can that addition be the true X factor that the Cavs needed to have more spacing and more perimeter shooting? For the Magic, can Jalen Suggs continue his improved three-point shooting? Can Gary Harris be a good three-point shooter and provide some spacing? Can Wendell Carter Jr. provide some spacing and three-point shooting? And potentially most interestingly in this series, the role of Jonathan Isaac against a Cavs team that runs multiple bigs for a significant portion of the game. The size, the length, and the defensive disruption of Jonathan Isaac is at an all-defensive team level. He's going to be significant in this series, especially on a young Magic team that's going to have some droughts offensively and is going to have to rely on the defensive end. It's going to be ugly. There's going to be young guys struggling, but there's also going to be some breakout moments with some really fun defense. I think this series has a lot of intrigue to see how these two young teams compete against each other. But the Cavs have the experience, the Cavs have the home court, and they have the best player in the series. Give me the Cavaliers in 6. Moving to the Western Conference, we gotta start with classic rivalry now. Clippers versus the Mavericks. Another Luka versus Kawhi and PG matchup. Now it's Luka and Kyrie against Kawhi and PG. Now Kawhi, Paul George, Terrence Mann, they're going to be hounding Luka all series. They're going to make it very difficult for Luka, and of course one of those guys that aren't on Luka, they're going to be on Kyrie. They're not going to have it easy. It's going to be difficult for them, no doubt. But you could argue the same thing for Kawhi and Paul George. You're going to have the like of Derek Jones Jr. playing a big role in this series, likely on Paul George, and then potentially the likes of P.J. Washington on Kawhi, or maybe they like just Derek Jones Jr. on Kawhi and they opt to go elsewhere for the PG matchup. But the Mavs have been playing their best ball of the year over the last month or so. They've been playing their best defense since their conference finals run, and Luka and Kyrie are cooking right now. The depth of the Clippers is going to be big. Russ and Norm are going to be very difficult to deal with. Now the Mavs have Tim Hardaway Jr., who's going to be important in his own right, but we know that Tim Hardaway Jr. is a bit hot and cold and can be prone to some interesting decisions. The biggest X factor, undoubtedly, in any series that he's ever in at this point in time in his career, James Harden. He could be the sole reason that the Clippers end up getting through. If he starts playing like a borderline all-star talent that he sometimes can be, they're probably going to win with Kawhi, with PG, with Russ, with Norm, with Zubac, with Terrence Mann. It's just too much talent. However, he could also be the issue, and he hasn't exactly been great heading into the postseason. This is going to be a great series, regardless. It's going to be some of the best players on this planet battling back and forth in round 1. I think it's going 7 either way, and I think it's pretty impossible to feel confident in either pick. Give me the Mavericks in 7. They've been cooking right now. Over 6 matchup, Minnesota. Holding on to the 1 seed for so much of the season, and unfortunately they fall to the 3 seed at the end of the year and have to face the Suns, who swept the season series against them. Now, the most interesting matchup in this is going to be, where does Cat go defensively? And that's always the case when he's at the 4, but it especially is the case against a Sun team who has KD at the 4, who has a good passing big in Nurkic, and ultimately have a 7-game series where you can start the game plan and exploit against Cat's defensive weaknesses, especially at the 4. So with Rudy being on the floor, being your defensive anchor, being matched up against Nurkic, Cat will either be on Kevin Durant or Grayson Allen. And just coming back from injury, that could be a big concern. It may become a big problem in the series. And his playoff woes could return from the offensive standpoint, from foul trouble, from just getting torched on defense. I mean, let's be real, he can't guard KD, but if you start telling him to chase around Grayson Allen on pin downs and flare screens, and it's going to be an issue. So that's going to be the biggest problem, and it's possible that Cat partially gets played out of this series, which obviously hurts the Timberwolves offense. KD, Booker, we know what they did last year in the playoffs. They were elite. The rest of the team was just the issue. Now, this year they got a solid, at least six-man rotation. And, of course, KD, Beal, Booker, Chris O'Neal, Yusuf Nurkic, and Grayson Allen. How much? Is that enough? Probably need some production elsewhere, but at least they have a solid 6. Last year, it's a solid 2 at times. Beal has started to cook down the stretch as well, which is big because he's been in and out of the lineup and struggling at times, but he's starting to get his groove back as we head into the postseason. Now, the biggest thing that's going to keep the Timberwolves in this series, their defense is still elite. Now, how Cat impacts that, we'll see. That might be where he gets played out of the series to a point because they just want to rely on McDaniels and McDaniels and Rudy Gobert and Anthony Edwards and Alexander Walker, who potentially plays a bigger role in the series, and or Naz Reid to really secure the defensive end, and then just hope that Anthony Edwards can cook. That's going to be tough against KD, Booker, and Beal. And when you're going to have Royce O'Neal or even Grayson Allen, who's developed into being a solid defender at this point, dealing with guarding Anthony Edwards for a majority of the series. Minnesota will keep it competitive, but Suns in 6. And out west, we get another rematch of the 2023 Conference Finals. The Denver Nuggets will be facing the Lakers in the first round. Bron and AD versus Jokic and Jamal Murray. And not much changed from last year's playoffs to where these teams are. Obviously, Bruce Brown is no longer in Denver, but the Lakers haven't done anything significant. Rui stayed, Reeves stayed, didn't make any significant additions. Dorian Prince probably being the most notable one. Now, last postseason, it was a close 4-game sweep. The Lakers were in these games. Now, I would argue that the Lakers role players are better going into this postseason, better form, better confidence, and have more experience, and they're more comfortable with their roles. Reeves looks good. D'Lo has continued to cook, including in the play-in game. And the Nuggets not having Bruce Brown will hurt. They still have good depth and an elite 5-man lineup, one of the best 5-man lineups in the league. But obviously no Bruce Brown is going to be felt. The fact that it was so close last year, I'd find it hard to imagine the Lakers don't get some amount of a dent in this series, but I think the Nuggets still win this pretty comfortably. I think they're off to the second round, winning this in 6. Last series is the Oklahoma City Thunder against what will either be the Sacramento Kings or New Orleans Pelicans. Obviously, you know at the time of listening which team this is. Unfortunately, this had to be recorded just before the end of their play-in game, so that 8 seed has not yet been determined at the time of recording. However, this is a New Orleans team that will likely not have Zion for the entire series, or a Kings team that will not have Malik Monk and Kevin Huerter. If you're looking at OKC, they're going to have Luke Dort, or they're going to have Jalen Williams hound De'Aaron Fox the entire series. Chet's going to be making life very difficult for Sabonis. If the Kings get through, if you're dealing with the likes of the Pelicans, CJ is going to have a similarly tough time, just like De'Aaron Fox will. Brandon Ingram's going to get hounded by Luke Dort the entire series. It's going to be very tough. OKC's young, inexperienced, so they might slip up a little bit, which might give these 8 seeds a little bit of leeway, but OKC is still the far superior team. Great defense, very defensively sound, great three-point shooting. And we know the deal. And Shay's him. OKC in 5. That is my first round playoff predictions. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Playoffs start today. Get into it.